And as everyone's starting to join the session, just know that we are recording the session. We'll share out the recordings with everyone who registered for all of this week's session. We'll share those links out to the recordings next week, so you'll have access to all those recordings. There's so much work in this week's sessions around teamwork and strengthening teams. Today's session is no exception, but I think it's such a great tool to be able to share this with your team or folks that you're mentoring, or new teams that you're just joining, the folks that you're spending time with at work, how to strengthen those teams, how to practice new ways of communicating. So thank you for joining us today. I see folks sharing in the chat where they're joining from and doing some introductions there. So please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat as we're getting started. Always like to know where folks are joining from. It's nice to see that we're kind of from all over the place. We've got folks with the Arizona Department of Education, folks in Houston, Texas, Northwestern, just a couple hours north of where Kristen and I are in Central Illinois, folks in Georgia and Pittsburgh. Thanks everyone for joining us. Very nice. Okay. Well, we will no doubt have a couple more people joining us as we're moving into our it's noon here in Central Illinois where I am in Central Time Zone, but folks are still joining us from all over the place. So thank you for introducing yourself as you're entering into our space here today. My name is Abby Prince Atwood. I serve as the Director of Campus Growth here at LeaderShape. I use she, her pronouns. I'm in Champaign, Illinois, just outside of Champaign, Illinois, a couple hours south of Chicago, where it's truly fall. Our weather has really dipped into fall temperatures, at least for a couple days. We'll get a couple more hot days coming in here, but nothing like what our co-host and Viet is experiencing out on the West Coast. And I'll have Viet introduce himself here in a couple minutes. So thank you for that. I know that we're a couple years into everyone using Zoom or using some kind of platform like Zoom, but I just wanted to offer as some guidance here as we use Zoom for our platform here today. We'll have a poll question that we'll be able to share with you all to respond to, just to get a sense of folks' thought process around our topic for today. If you want to keep your cameras on so that Viet and I have faces that we can communicate with, but perhaps keep your microphones muted. If you feel like introducing folks later to unmute themselves to answer a question or ask a question, please feel free to do so. And otherwise, feel free to use the chat, just like you're all already doing there as you're introducing yourself. If you've got questions or comments or support for someone else's comment or question, please feel free to do that in the chat and use your reaction buttons there. At LeaderShape, we like to start sessions off with a land acknowledgement. And so I will share this LeaderShape's official land acknowledgement with you here, as you also consider the air and space and sea and waters around you, as well as you think about who and what came before you on the spaces where you are today. If you're new to LeaderShape or perhaps need a refresher of LeaderShape and what we're all about, I will offer our vision: a just, caring, and thriving world where all lead with integrity and a healthy disregard for the impossible, with a mission to transform the world by increasing the number of people who join us in that vision. So thank you for joining us today and for being a part of our community. We're so excited to have you all as we kick off another round of our virtual conversations for leadership educators. This is the third day of the week where we have our friend Viet joining us to talk about improv and how we can use that to strengthen our psychological safety in spaces. And before we do that, I will just offer LeaderShape's definition of leadership, just to kind of ground us into the space. We use the definition that leadership is the practice of co-creating a more just, caring, and thriving world through living uniquely with integrity. So we'll use that as a way to kind of ground us into this idea of leadership as we talk about that. And then I will turn things over to you, Viet, if you want to share your slides and your presentation as we move further into our time together.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Abby. Thank you, everyone, for joining. Again, my name is Viet, and I'm coming to you from semi-sunny Los Angeles. where I've been for almost 23 years. I really appreciate all of you joining. I'm going to share my screen um, with you all, and it's more of talking points for us because I'm hoping I can get a little interaction with all of you in just a little bit. So potentially that some of you can experience what it's like to go through improvisation and then have a conversation about how this contributes to psychological safety and strengthening teams in a framework of leadership development. So, Abby, if you don't mind, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see my slide? Perfect. And again, I hopefully won't rely too much on these slides. I just want to give you some things to think about before we turn it over to the interactive portion of our presentation. Just a little background on me. I am the Deputy City Manager for a city in Los Angeles County. The city is called Torrance. We have about 150,000 residents and 1,400 employees. So we're a mid-sized city in Los Angeles. And my primary responsibilities are in organizational and talent development. I'm also responsible for social services. And so recently we launched some work in the space of homelessness. And I have a chance to actually do direct service to people experiencing homelessness right in my own community, which has been a thrill for me. It brings together two different worlds I haven't had a chance to bring together in my past, and now I'm getting to do this on a day-to-day basis. When it comes to organizational development, one of the key initiatives I have, which I appreciate for those of you who are in the educational system, a key initiative I have is to take as many of our employees through leadership development courses as possible and to make it as practical as possible in our organization. I'm really proud to tell you all, I was actually a graduate of the National LeaderShape session in 1996. And just a few months ago, I had a chance to be a cluster group facilitator at Boston College, also at the national session. So LeaderShape is near and dear to my heart. And the word co-create makes me so happy because that's exactly what I teach in our leadership academy here at the city. That the old model of leadership development really focused in on one person creating a vision and then enrolling people or selling people onto that vision. And over the last 2 years at the city, I've been asking us, how can we think about drawing people in right from the start? So now we are co-creating a vision together where we're all involved. All voices come to the table, and what we create is so much stronger than what we could have individually created. And that's the idea behind psychological safety, which we will get more into just a little bit. Besides my work as at the city, I also happen to perform improv. I'm a graduate of the Second City Conservatory in Hollywood, something I'm very proud about. And I had a chance to perform many different shows at Second City. This is one of the last shows I performed in right before the pandemic. And it was one of my favorite shows. I'm going to take a minute and actually ask Abby if you could pop up the poll question. And I'm going to start by asking all of you on this webinar, to what extent have you used arts-based learning as a way to develop leadership skills? Arts-based learning is simply the use of artistic expression to drive development or business results. So again, arts-based learning is simply the use of artistic expression to drive development or business results. Great. And feel free to select many of these options. Showing a film or video clip to illustrate a leadership lesson, that is definitely one that I hear a lot from as a way that we can engage our learners to look at the essence of leadership by watching a certain video clip and having a discussion on it. Great. Let's see what our next closest is. We have a few people who have created art or music to strengthen teamwork. Excellent. Believe it or not, I did play oboe for many, many years. I was part of an orchestra. And when I think about collaboration, it is very much what I think about when I was in orchestra is how do these individual parts come together to create a sound that could not have been created by any of the individual parts. Excellent. And one more that I see popping up at the top of the list, teaching theater skills to increase soft skills, which is why we are here today. We are going to take a look at how improv can be used in leadership development. And I'm just going to gently preview you all. In about 15 minutes, I may ask for some people who are willing to participate to volunteer and actually go through some virtual improv exercises. I promise my commitment to you is we will make it a safe environment. So over the next few slides, as I talk to you a little bit more about leadership development, psychological safety, and the role improv may play in it, I'm going to ask some of you to please consider being our volunteers today to demonstrate how these exercises work. Before I do that, though, I wanted to share with you a story. On the screen here, you see Clever Hans. Clever Hans is actually the horse in this picture. And Clever Hans is accompanied by Wilhelm von Osten. Wilhelm von Osten is the caretaker of Clever Hans. And in the late 1800s and early 1900s, Clever Hans and Wilhelm von Osten went from small town to small town in Germany. And they had this amazing trick that they did that would wow audiences. Clever Hans, the horse, could do math. And here's what it looked like. Wilhelm von Osten would ask Clever Hans, what's 2 plus 3? And Clever Hans would stomp his foot 5 times, signifying that Clever Hans knew 2 plus 3 equals 5. So Wilhelm von Osten and Clever Hans did this for a few years, and they finally get to a town where the townspeople said, look, any horse can do addition. Can this horse do, that's not a true story, by the way, I made that part up. Someone in the audience said, can Wilhelm von Osten, can Clever Hans, Wilhelm von Osten, can Clever Hans do multiplication? And Wilhelm von Osten said, Clever Hans, what's 3 times 4? And once again, Clever Hans stomped his hoof 12 times, signifying that he knew 3 times 4 equals 12. So this goes on for a little bit longer, and they get to a town where they said, we know what's happening here. Wilhelm von Osten is vocally cueing Clever Hans. There's something going on in the vocal cues, and Clever Hans is picking up on these vocal cues. So we are going to ask Wilhelm von Osten to be in a different room, and a member of the audience will ask the mathematics question to Clever Hans. So a member of the audience came up and asked, Clever Hans, what's 11 times 2? And guess what? Clever Hans stomped his hoof 22 times, signifying that he knew 11 times 2 is 22. It wasn't until they got to a village in Germany that someone very perceptive picked up on something. The villager picked up that when the member of the audience asked Clever Hans a mathematics question, and the villager did not know the correct answer, Clever Hans also did not know the correct answer. So I'm curious, who has not heard this story before, because this is a true story, who thinks they know how Clever Hans learned to do mathematics? I'd love some interaction. If anyone wants to raise their hand, I'd love to hear what you think. Any ideas? How did Clever Hans learn to do math?
I actually know the answer. I just read this story recently, so I'm going to stay silent. But I also just want to believe in the power of horses being smart.
Can you just, oh, there's a chat. Let's see. From Kelsey, energy, power of confidence. Thank you for that, Kelsey. I like that answer. In this case, it's not what they found out. And from Celine, psychic. I wish that were the answer. Here's what happened. When anyone, including Wilhelm von Osten or a member of the audience, would ask Clever Hans a question, they would ask Clever Hans, what's 3 times 7. And then they would, when they asked the question, they would look Clever Hans in the eyes. And when they were done asking the question, they would look at his hoof, cueing Clever Hans to start stomping. And when Clever Hans got to the right answer, they would look up to Clever Hans' eyes, cueing Clever Hans to stop stomping. So the lesson in the story of Clever Hans is that Clever Hans learned to pay attention to body language that we are unaware that we project. So he picked up on inadvertent cues that we all sent him in asking our mathematical questions to figure out how to perform math. I see some answers in from Buck. I don't know the answer, but I am intrigued because this. Thank you for that, Buck. This is fascinating. Even if he can't do math, he is still one smart horse. I would completely agree with you, Kristen, on that one. What does this story have to do with our session today? There's a fascinating study, and I have a chance to teach in a few different organizations, and I tend to teach in companies or nonprofits or even government agencies, in addition to the work I do at the City of Torrance. And the study I am often referencing more and more these days is a study that comes from Google. Google, a few years back, decided to study why some of their teams were high performing as opposed to other teams that were performing average. So high performing teams, what differentiates high performing teams from other teams at Google? By the way, if you want to read this research, there's a lot of literature out it. It's called Project Aristotle. And what researchers at Google found out is that there are 5 attributes that differentiate high-performing teams from any other team. Number 1, high-performing teams have psychological safety, and we will define it on the next slide. Number 2, high-performing teams have dependability. That is to say, team members do what they say they will do, when they say they will do it, and at the level of quality that Google expects of all of their employees. Number 3, structure and clarity. Every person on teams at high-performing teams at Google understands their roles and responsibilities and what they're expected to produce, and understands what everyone else's roles and responsibilities are as well. Number 4 is meaning. People feel personally committed to the work that they do on a day-to-day basis. And number 5, impact. That is to say, high-performing team members feel like the work that the team does contributes to positive change. The fascinating part is Google researchers say numbers 2 through 5 cannot exist without number 1. Number 1 was head and shoulders the most important attribute that high-performing teams have at Google. So what exactly is psychological safety? Here's a definition that I wanted to share with you. When I'm in organizations and I share with them how I see psychological safety, sometimes I use the phrase that psychological safety is a belief that team members can speak up, ask questions, and contribute freely without the fear of ridicule or retribution. That's often how I describe it in organizations. Subsequent to Google's research, there's been a ton of other research that supports the idea that psychological safety has positive outcomes that teams are expected to deliver. The one I often like to reference comes from McKinsey & Company, which is a consulting firm. In 2021, McKinsey & Company released their study, and this is the one that excites me as I go out and I teach about psychological safety and how it builds stronger teams and how it should be a part of a leadership development program. McKinsey & Company found out that leaders can learn some basic behaviors that promote psychological safety. Leaders at all levels can learn and demonstrate specific leadership behaviors that lead to greater psychological safety. So you're probably at the edge of your seat now and you're saying, Viet, what are those behaviors? What are those behaviors that promote psychological safety? Research from Charles Duhigg found that there are exactly 2 behaviors that positively correlate to psychological safety on teams. 2 behaviors. The first behavior is called equality in conversational turn-taking. All that means is Duhigg found that teams where every team member speaks at roughly the same amount has psychological safety. So again, equality in conversational turn-taking is that team members speak at roughly the same amount. And that is a positive correlate for psychological safety. Second behavior that Duhigg identified as being a positive correlate for psychological safety is ostentatious listening. And that is simply that we are fully present and distraction-free when someone else is speaking. That we practice body language that demonstrates receptivity, and that we're listening actively, and that we can contribute or ask questions that are relevant to the other person's ideas, which shows them that we truly listen to them. That is the concept of ostentatious listening. Those are the only two behaviors that Duhigg found that are positive correlates for psychological safety. Now, I will acknowledge to you, there's a whole body of research about how leaders can create cultures that promote psychological safety. Today's session is focused a little bit more on the behaviors, because as I was thinking about our time together today, all of you are developing the leaders of today and tomorrow. And so my bias in this presentation is, how do we provide you with some tools that allows the leaders you are developing to have greater equality and conversational turn-taking on their teams, and how to promote ostentatious listening on their teams. So exactly why are we here today? Why is this guy who performs improv and is a deputy city manager, why specifically is he here today to talk about improv? Well, improv is simply the act of performing without a script or without an opportunity to plan. I've been performing improv for over 10 years now. And during that time, I've performed a lot of good improv and I've performed a lot of bad improv. Here's what good improv looks like. Good improv looks like team members on stage with me, listening closely to the ideas of one another, contributing their unique ideas freely to advance and support the ideas of others, and remaining flexible in an ever-changing environment. Good improv also looks like co-creating a shared narrative, because nothing is planned on stage. It requires us to co-create a shared narrative. If you think about the words I just used, I basically described things such as equality and conversational turn-taking and ostentatious listening. In our world, we use fancier words like ostentatious listening or co-creating a shared narrative. In the improv world, we use the term yes and. That's listening closely to others and contributing and sharing the space with everyone else. Something I will point out when it comes to improvisation, Abby and I had this great conversation just minutes before you all joined. Improvisation does not speak to comedy or drama. It's silent. Improvisation is simply a process that we use. It's simply a process. When I incorporate improv training into my leadership development programs, I shy away from even talking about the comedy aspect. Now, the truth is improv ends up being super funny because real life is funnier than fiction. What I do focus in on is the process and the conversation we have after people experience the process. From having used improv for many years in talent development programs, there's two benefits I've found when it comes to improvisation training. Number one is we are actually building skills. And again, the skills we are building is taking turns in conversation. And number two is razor-focused listening or ostentatious listening. We are actually building those skills. There's a second benefit to improvisation training I've found over time. When people are on the improv stage, there's a certain distance and detachment from the realities of school or the workplace that behaviors are a little more authentic. And it's in those moments when behaviors are more authentic that we meaning all of you who are in leadership development, have an opportunity to ask powerful questions to allow our leaders to reflect on what they are noticing about themselves. And here's my thought for you on that. As people who are in the leadership development world, the talent development world, we can serve two roles. We can serve many roles. The two I'll focus in on this slide is we could be the tugboat. A tugboat does the work of pulling ships to safety. And in the process, the tugboat gets worn out. It gets beaten up. And sometimes we have to be that tugboat as we develop leaders. Other times, we have an opportunity to be the lighthouse, where we shine light and allow the ships to make their decision on the passage they wish to take. The lighthouse shines light and allows the ships to make that decision. Those are two ways in which we can impact as we are developing our leaders. Believe it or not, I'm actually done with my slides. So I am going to do, I'm going to stop sharing for a minute. And I'm just going to check in with, while I gently ask for some volunteers to consider if they would like to go through some improv exercises, I'm going to check in and ask, what concepts can I clarify for you at this point about how I use improv training to help create psychological safety and develop leaders? Okay. Oh, Abby, please.
No, I was just going to say, I feel like you've done such a wonderful job of framing up what this, what improv does for us and how to practice it. I think that's so great. Kristen knows I often start conversations by saying, I was just listening to a podcast, but I was just listening to a podcast where Amy Edmondson, who's an organizational behavioral scientist, was talking about this exact thing around how we can practice that psychological safety. And she was using the example of Paul McCartney and John Lennon, how whenever they were writing songs, like they might have a guitar line, but they don't have the lyrics, but they can kind of like stumble through being safe with each other and figuring out what they want this song to sound like. And there wasn't a, no, that's not right, or we've done that before. There was just this encouragement to like keep going with this riff until they developed a great song, which, as we know, they did over and over and over again because they'd created that psychological safety. So, but I hadn't put it into those terms that you provided us. That, so thank you for setting that up in those ways. I think that's really great. And I see Kelsey's example here too of thinking about asking for strategies or practices to manage up and creating psychological safety. Can you provide some thoughts or suggestions around that?
Kelsey, I love this question. This just happened in my life. I'll share with you a personal story, and I do have permission to I do have permission from my boss to share this story. My boss is the city manager, so I report directly to him, and we just had a significant turnover in our city council members, and we have 7 city council members. It was a turnover of 4 new council members. And he was having some difficulty with his footing with this city council. And so very specifically, the city council was having difficulty separating the policy-making responsibilities that they have from the day-to-day operations that my boss has. And at one point, my boss, we've been in each other's lives for 16 years, and I adore him. He's an amazing leader. His name is Aram Chaparian. Aram, I noticed, was no longer practicing ostentatious listening. In meetings I started having with him, and in meetings where I observed his behavior with others, he was cutting people off. He wasn't fully listening. Someone who reports to me, who I adore, her name is Lindy. And again, she gave me permission, who I trust deeply. She's amazing. I talked to Lindy about it because I was really struggling. What do I do with Aram? And Lindy said this to me. Viet, we can't ask people to change until they first feel like we empathize with what they're going through. She asked me, what can you do to care more about Aram? And I changed my behavior. As I went into meetings with Aram, I listened to him. When he cut me off, I listened. I spent more time being intentional with my own behavior. And at some point, Aram said, there's something going on here, Viet. I am finding that I'm unable to stay fully present because I can feel it right now with you. You are being extra patient with me. And here's someone who's been in my life for 15 years. And that was the first time we had a chance to talk about it. And he said, I felt cared for is the only reason why I even noticed what I was doing to you. Aram was responding to the environment around him. He felt this tremendous pressure, Kelsey, from his bosses. And I had to start from a space of empathy before I could even have the conversation. Aram, what's going on here? What's the lack of active listening? What's the lack of actively sharing the space with me to have a conversation? It changed night and day for him. So I hope they answered your question, Kelsey. And it's a true story that just happened months ago. And again, I really want to highlight, I'm very cautious about positionality. Someone who on paper reports to me had to point this out to me. And to me, that's the beauty of just honoring other people's gifts that they bring. Lindy on paper reports to me and is the one who said, hey, Viet, let's pull back a little bit. How can we empathize with Aram? What an amazing moment for me to learn and grow as well as Aram. Thank you for asking that, Kelsey. Before we jump into interactive exercises, I'm going to drop into the chat a little guide I made for you. So I gave you, because I love you all for joining this webinar, I made you a little cheat sheet on how to actually implement these exercises. So I'm dropping in the chat right now. I give you step-by-step instructions as well as questions I recommend to debrief the exercises. So for me, the opportunity all of you have as you develop your staff or your students is to start asking questions at the end of these exercises and help shine that light on behaviors that they may or may not have noticed in themselves. It's our opportunity to get people to reflect on it. I'm going to walk you through one exercise, and then I'm going to ask for volunteers for a second exercise. So one of the best exercises I found, I'm going to explain how this exercise works, and then I'm going to share with you some of the debriefing questions that I use. One of the best exercises I found to warm a group up to improv is by passing an imaginary ball. And here's how this exercise works. By the way, in your guide, I named it Red Ball. Don't ask me where I come up with these titles. I just make up titles. So in this exercise, people stand in a circle, and it usually works best with 8 to 12 participants. People are passing an imaginary red ball that's roughly the size and weight of a basketball. And all people are doing is practicing making eye contact with someone else and the other person acknowledging that the other person wants to pass a ball to them. And then they pass the ball and say, red ball. And then they pass the ball. The second person catches it and says, thank you, red ball. That second person then makes perfectly good eye contact with the third person, says red ball, passes the red ball. The third person catches it and says, thank you, red ball, and so on and so on. That's all you do. Then you are going to ask the person with the red ball to put it at their feet and ask for a new volunteer to pick up a gray ball, which is roughly the size and weight of a ping pong ball. And this one is passed with an underhand pass. And they're going to do the exact same thing with the gray ball. And then at some point, while the gray ball is being passed, you're going to introduce the red ball into the mix. So now you have a red ball and gray ball being passed around in the circle. Your opportunity at the end of the exercise is to ask participants what allowed you to stay fully present. And you're likely to hear things such as keeping my eyes up at all times and paying attention to what's going on there. recognizing that at points, so one person may have two balls, and offering myself to support that person to catch it right away. Those are some examples of what you'll hear. You will also observe some very interesting things in this exercise. Every time I've done it, what you will see is people placing a lot of energy into this exercise and making sure that they have the other person's attention before passing the ball. People take this exercise very, very seriously. And your opportunity is to ask, what would it be like if we invested that same energy that we just did in this exercise to messages that we send to someone else? And we make 100% certain that before we say thank you or I love you, that the other person is ready to receive our message. What would it be like if we did that? Those are powerful questions that all of you in leadership development can ask your students to get them to think a little bit differently about how their interactions may create greater psychological safety. All right, y'all, the time is here. I am hoping two of you would be willing to try an exercise with me on screen. Oh, great. Thank you. I think I want to make sure I pronounce your name correctly. Celine, is that correct? Celine, perfect. Thank you, Celine. And Kelsey. Did I pronounce your name correct, Kelsey? Perfect. Okay. Here is how this is going to work. I'm going to explain how I would recommend you do it in person, and then I'm going to switch to the virtual way I would explain it. So Celine and Kelsey, if you were in person, this is the exercise. You two are going to sit across from one another and just face one another. One of you will be the focus of the exercise. The other one is the supporter. So I'm just going to ask that Celine be the focus of this exercise, and Kelsey, you're going to support. This exercise in your manuals I provided to you is called Remember the Time. So we are going to make up a situation that Celine has been in before. And Kelsey, your role is to support that situation by giving Celine gifts. Here's how this will look. Kelsey, if you are sitting face to face, Kelsey, you will start and I will give you an imaginary time. So for instance, I may say, this is the time Celine auditioned for American Idol. So Kelsey, you're going to start first by saying, Celine, do you remember that time you auditioned for American Idol? And then Celine would go next and say, yes. And I got up on that stage and made perfectly good eye contact with the toughest judge up on stage, Simon. And then Kelsey, it goes back to you, and you're going to come up with a line that supports Celine. So your line might be, yes. And you smiled with your beautiful smile at Simon, and Simon melted. And Celine is going to say, yes. And I belted out the first song, Halo from Beyonce. And Simon hit that buzzer, and so on and so on. You're going to go back and forth to support one another. Celine and Kelsey, what questions do you have for me about those instructions? We are going to practice it here. So I'm going to ask all of you, I'm going to invite all of you to, I'm not sure if I know how to do this, to change your view in the top right-hand corner to hide non-video participants. So if you are not in this, I'm going to ask you to turn your camera off so we can just focus in on Kelsey and Celine. So turn off your camera, please, if I can invite you, and then switch your view to hide non-video participants. And that way, Celine and Kelsey can be our focus. All right, so Celine, your first line is going to be, I'm sorry, Kelsey, your first line is going to be, Celine, do you remember that time you scaled the Eiffel Tower? My encouragement to you is just go with it and trust each other and give each other the ostentatious listening and to do equality and conversational turn taking. Here we go. Thank you two for being our starters.
Celine, do you remember the time that you scaled the Eiffel Tower?
Yes, I do remember that. I also remember Paris looking so gloomy and rainy, and I almost slipped as I
Yeah,
was climbing, but I persevered.
you did. Yes, you did persevere. Sorry for interrupting you. It was kind of gloomy that day. And you remember that you caught yourself when you were almost about to fall?
Got it. I almost forgot that part, but I remember having the most amazing lunch once we got to the top.
Yes, it was so good. I still dream about that cafe. I think that you had the pesto sandwich.
Yes. And I am typically not someone who likes pesto, but I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was the climb that made me hungry or maybe that pesto was just so good, but I loved that sandwich.
Yeah, you worked so hard to get to the top. I'm sure that that sandwich was the best thing that you've ever had. And we remember you had some tea and it like cured your headache you had at the end of the climb.
Of chamomile tea and something else I can't remember, but I remember me having the tea and then I also remember you getting that like nice coffee. And I just remember you saying that it was so delicious and it was one of the best espressos you've ever had.
Yeah, it sure was. And I had the easy way out because I got to ride the elevator to the top and meet you where you were. But you did such a good job and you earned that breakfast, that meal that we had.
Yay! Can we give Kelsey and Celine a virtual round of applause, please? And feel free to change your view again. Kelsey and Celine, if you don't mind hanging on, I want to ask you, what was that experience like for the two of you?
I feel like honestly it was a little hard. Trying to like keep thinking of things that happened in the Eiffel Tower. Um, and try not to repeat like too much of what something had already said. It's like, yeah, oh yeah, you remember when you fell? She already said that. So, but I was just trying to keep it going and also trying to make it not centered on me since I was a supporter of like, remember when you did this? Remember when you did this? So I was trying to like still make sure I was there in the story, but not like it was focused on me. So
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. Celine, how was that for you?
I will say it was nice. I will say I've never scaled the Eiffel Tower, but it was nice to have a conversation where someone is affirming the things that you're saying. Um, and I was also trying to think of things too, and I'm like trying to tie Kelsey into the story.
Celine, I thank you for saying that. That's the concept of yes and. Yes and on the improv stage is simply acknowledging what someone else says. That's the affirmation that you felt from Kelsey. Kelsey gave you affirmation by simply jumping on the ideas. And the best part is Kelsey gets to allow Kelsey to be beautiful by contributing in any way that Kelsey wants, knowing that you would jump on board. Whether it was the pesto that we explored or almost falling that we explored, that's the power that we have that creates psychological safety, where we know there will be no ridicule or retribution for the things that we contribute. Outstanding job, you two. Yeah, and someone Abby noted Kelsey. It didn't seem like it was hard for Kelsey or Celine. Excellent. I am going to, just so I'm a little aware of time, I'm going to ask if there are maybe 5 people that would be willing to volunteer for the next exercise and come on camera. Let's see if I can get 5 people. Okay, Angie, perfect. Thank you, Angie.
I see Buck volunteered also
Oh, Buck.
in the
Thank you,
chat.
Buck.
Yeah.
Perfect. Great. So we have great. And Celine and Kelsey, feel free to volunteer again if you'd like. Here's what I'm going to do. Angie, if it's okay, I'm going to ask you to put a 1 in front of your name, just so that I can structure this a little bit, just the number 1. Buck, if I can ask you to put number 2 before your name. Thank you, Kelsey. Kelsey, I will take you up on that. If you could put 3 in front of your name. And could I get one more volunteer for this one? This one's going to change. Oh, perfect. Thank you, Celine. Celine, if you can put the number 4 in front of your name, that'd be great. Okay. I'm going to share my screen again because this one does require a little bit of guidance on my part. And again, if you are not participating in this one, if you don't mind turning off your camera, and we will focus in on those who are involved. I'm going to share my screen, and then actually, you know what? I thought of something better. I'm going to drop it in the chat. That way we can continue to look at one another. This next one is a story structure format. And I'm going to put the story structure format in the body of the chat right now. Okay, so here's how this works. Each one of you will get one line in the story you're about to tell. Here's the catch on this one. Your line must begin with what I'm providing you, and it's because it's a story structure format. By the way, once I hit send, some of you will recognize this structure. It's called the Pixar. So if you've ever watched a Pixar movie, this is the structure in which it goes. Okay, great. I just sent it to you in chat. I will give you an example. We're going to use the story structure to tell a story together, a story that you already know. For example, if I give you Wizard of Oz, this is how it may go. Person 1, who is Angie in this case, might start off once upon a time in the state of Kansas lived a young woman by the name of Dorothy. Person 2, who is Buck, might say, and every day while Dorothy did her chores on the farm, she sang about what life would be like on the other side of the rainbow. Person 3, which is Kelsey, then one day a terrible storm swept Dorothy into a strange new land. Person 4, which is Celine, and because of that, Dorothy was required to run along a yellow brick road with a lion, a tin man, and a scarecrow. Thank you, Celine. Person 5, which will be back to Angie, and because of that, they were chased by a witch on their way to Oz. Person 6, which will be Buck again, and because of that, they were captured and put in a castle. Person 7, and because of that, they had to fight the witch until they could break free. Person 8, until finally Dorothy clicked her heels and was magically transported back to Kansas. And person 9, and ever since that day, Dorothy realized there's no place like home. So Angie, you'll have 1, 5, and 9. Those will be your lines. So we won't give you, and I'm going to step out of this, we won't give you Wizard of Oz. I'm going to ask that the 4 of you work together to tell the story of Cinderella. Cinderella. It looks like all 4 of you are nodding. So I'm going to step out. Whenever you're ready, you may begin.
Once upon a time, there was a beautiful young woman who was incredibly hardworking, but found herself in an incredible situation.
And every day she worked and cleaned up after her wicked stepmother and her 2 evil stepsisters.
Then one day she found out that there was going to be a ball in town.
Because of that, she worked really hard to clean the whole house so that she could attend the ball.
And because of that, her stepsisters hated her.
And because of that, they sabotaged her so that she wouldn't be able to attend the ball and locked her in a room.
And so finally, a fairy godmother came along and made her a beautiful dress into a beautiful princess with a grand carriage to get to the ball.
And ever since that day, she met the prince and lived happily ever after.
Yay! Let's give them a round of applause. Don't go anywhere, you 4. There's part 2. Outstanding job. Here's how I use this exercise. We earlier spoke about the concept of empathy. This exercise, by the way, really helps with equality and conversational turn taking. When we work to tell a story together and everyone gets one line and we put it in the story structure format, it requires us to be succinct and share the stage with everyone else. I will also offer for you, this exercise is very helpful as you develop leaders. Storytelling is very much an important part of leadership. When we want to share stories of success, there is a framework that happens in there. So I like Kelsey's confession. I've never seen Cinderella. I will say, Kelsey, it's also because of teamwork. You're listening to everyone else around you, knowing that they're also going to support you, that works really well. Good job. I will, as I was mentioning earlier, story structures sometimes help your leaders tell stories of success so others can see a path on how they may wish to consider doing things in the future. So that's another benefit, story structure. This exercise is going to be about empathy. So I'm going to have you tell another story through the framework of Cinderella. Only this time, I'm going to ask you to do it purely from the perspective of another character. Here's how it might sound if it was the Wizard of Oz. Once upon a time in the state of Kansas lived a scrappy dog named Toto. And every day while his caretaker Dorothy was doing her chores, Toto would bound through the fields of Kansas as happy as can be. And then one day, Dorothy's insistence on finding what was on the other side of the rainbow angered the universe, and they were transported to another world. And because of that, Toto was accused to be an accessory to murder. And because of that, Toto had to run with 3 complete strangers on a yellow brick road. And because of that, Toto wasn't as agile as he was on brick as he would have been on the fields of a farm. And they were caught by flying monkeys. Number 8, until finally Toto said, I've had enough of this, and hopped out of his basket, and they were all magically transported back to the state of Kansas. And number 9, and ever since that day, anytime his caretaker would sing about life on the other side of the rainbow, Toto would avoid her. So that's telling the same story, this time from someone else's perspective. If it's okay with you, Angie, I'm going to rotate to Buck this time, and Buck is going to have one. So everyone's going to be 1 number off. So Buck will be 1, Kelsey will be 2, Celine 3, Angie 4, and so on. So if you just follow that format, Buck gets to pick whatever perspective this story will be told from. And Buck, trust that all of your team members are going to support your version of Cinderella. Yeah, we got some cheering already going on. I'll turn off my camera whenever you're ready, Buck. You got it.
Oh gosh. Once upon a time, there was a widow named Lady Tremaine whose husband passed away and left her with 3 daughters, 2 biological daughters and 1 stepdaughter named Cinderella.
And every day she resented her husband for passing away and leaving her with 3 girls that she had no idea how to take care of by herself.
And one day, when the family got invited to a ball, Cinderella, the stepdaughter she resented the most, said she wanted to go.
And because of that, Lady Tremaine got incredibly angry and said, absolutely not. You'll stay home and clean the house.
And because of that, Cinderella cleaned and pouted and sang to all the vermin that she brought into the home.
And because of that, Lady Tremaine grew more angry and continued to punish Cinderella, but reward her other 2 biological daughters for being the beautiful princesses that they were.
And because of that, no matter how much Cinderella tried to get in Lady Tremaine's good graces, she didn't, and they went to the ball without her.
Until finally, the universe decided that Cinderella was going to receive a gift of being able to go to the ball. And she did. And everything that she needed showed up right in front of her.
And ever since that day, Lady Tremaine wished she had locked Cinderella in the tower room and bricked the door closed.
So good, you all. Let's give them a virtual round of applause. Brilliant. If everyone wants to pop back so we can wrap up our time together. Let me tell you what I loved about that. You all did such a good job staying in the moment on that second round. When Buck established that this was the stepmother's story, all of your lines contributed from the stepmother's perspective. It's not mice that are helpful, it's vermin. It's her whininess. It's Cinderella's whininess. That's the perspective of the other. Those are powerful exercises that I find that help us build empathy by asking us to strengthen the muscle that allows us to see the story from someone else's perspective. It's also just fun, to be honest with you. I know we're super short on time. The handout I provided to you actually has my contact information. If we were in person, I would have you do a lot more activities in smaller groups. I really appreciate everyone who volunteered and everyone who's watched and made comments about these exercises. Please reach out to me if I can help you in any way think about leadership development through Improv, and I'm happy to give you ideas. I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm more than willing to share with you what works or what doesn't work with me. Thanks so much for joining, and I will turn it back over to Abby.
Viet, thank you. That was remarkable. I think we all learned a lot about the different skills of improv and the ways to kind of like keep the ball rolling in a conversation, but also be so intentional in how we're listening to what's happening around us. I did not know the name of the stepmother from Cinderella. That's also something I learned from this conversation. So thank you everyone so much. I truly, truly appreciate it. I see a question here from Joan about the handout in the chat. Viet, if you don't mind posting that link to the handout one more time in the chat, if you're able to, just to share that link with or that document with folks. But Viet, thank you for your time here today. Thank you for your expertise and the ways in which you've shared this information with us. It was such a fun way to learn, which always makes learning more memorable, I think, but we've all had a chance to practice here these improv skills to provide some psychological safety among our teams. And I truly appreciate that. Lady Tremaine, I will never forget that. That was really wonderful. As you're leaving us today, I know we've got a couple more minutes of our time together. I just wanted to share a QR code that goes to LeaderShape's program guide. So there's information about all the programs that LeaderShape offers, both in-person and virtual programs. So if you want to share, or if you want to collect to that QR code so you can learn more about what we have going on here. One other thing I wanted to share is that we do have more sessions happening the rest of this week. So tomorrow, Vernon Wall and Kristen Young will share about what DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion looks like for LeaderShape in this year and beyond. So I've shared a link in the chat with you all here that you can go to that to register for tomorrow's session. And then here on the screen, we have a merch site available. So if you're looking for LeaderShape t-shirts and hoodies and some more products to come soon, I've just posted a link to our chat or to the Square site for you there in the chat. Vernon, I appreciate your have courage and be kind as a nice tagline to the work that we're doing here. Thank you for that. And then LeaderShape is partnering with the NCLP to provide the Leadership Educator Symposium. So you can register for that through our socials or through the NCLP's website there, nclp.umd.edu. You've got the link there to do that as well. So thank you everyone for your time. Viet, if you've got time to stick around, if folks have questions and want to hear from you or ask any questions after the fact, then we'll have some office hours to stick around for a while if people have questions. But otherwise, thank you everyone so much for joining us. And we hope to see you again for the sessions tomorrow and on Friday.
Thanks, everyone.